Hello and welcome back to my humble show. I am your host for today and every other day, the Articulate Thinker, hopefully, here to bring you art articles and articulation straight from Articulation Station, where I'll be assessing the situation, so be sure to like, subscribe, and enjoy the ride. Don't forget to turn on those bell notifications while you're at it. It's over here somewhere. Here we go. A bell. I'm not going to ring it right now because it is currently 5 o'clock in the morning. I have not yet been to sleep. In fact, I did not sleep the previous night either. I slept just a few short hours during the day. Have not had much rest as of late. But yes, we had a lot going on, including a birthday party in the family. But I have some things I want to talk about, namely something about Vance Boelter, the killer of the Hortmans, most notably, in Minnesota from several months ago. So, this somewhat mysterious attempted killing spree has come up a lot in relation to Charlie Kirk's assassination. Those on the right have said, for example, that political violence is just a left-wing problem. And when that is said, Democrats fire back. Look no further back than a couple of months ago with the killing of the former Speaker of Minnesota, Melissa Hortman, and her husband, and the other attempts as well. So we're going to talk about it. We're going to break it down. You can feel free to disagree with me. Let me know in the comments below what you think, what you know. Yeah, I think this is going to be interesting. I'll give you a sneak peek here, not to make light of any deaths, but this is all quite fascinating if you're into murder mystery sort of things. Is it really as mysterious as one might have you believe? Here on the screen you see a so-called manifesto, which I prefer to refer to as a note, which was written by Vance Boelter himself shortly after his initial killings in his attempted killing spree. Yes, he basically credits, if that's the right word, Tim Walz, governor of Minnesota, for his decisions, devastating decisions. Is this to be taken seriously? You tell me. But before I get into all of that, I want to just say that this is difficult. This is time-consuming. I mean, talking your ear off. Whether you're into that sort of thing or not, I'm just doing my best here, and you can do the rest. I am trying my best to be as objective as possible. I don't always get it right, and people on the right might say sometimes that I'm coming across as leftist. So be it. People on the left might say sometimes that I'm coming across as a right-winger, since rightist is not a thing. How come leftist is a thing, but rightist is not a thing? Questions. So many questions. Anyways, I am much further to the right than to the left, just so you know. But I'm going to cover my bases here to the best of my ability. But I just wanted to get that out of the way before I get on with today's topic. Vance Boelter. Back to this so-called manifesto, which isn't really a manifesto. Tim Walz wanted me to kill Amy Klobuchar. According to these scribbles. I say scribbles because they are a bit hard to read. His writing is much better than mine, I must say. But he starts, Dear Kash Patel, and this is Boelter speaking. My name is Vance Boelter, some other credentials and stuff in there. I'm just kind of skimming. I am the shooter at large in Minnesota involved in the 2 shootings the morning of Saturday, and he lists the exact times. I will probably be dead by the time you read this. I wanted to share some info with you that you might find interesting. I was told by U.S. military people off the books starting in college. I have been on projects since that time in Eastern Europe, North America, the Middle East, and Africa, and some other words I cannot quite read, at least not in the essence of time. But he goes on to say that recently he was appalled about a project that Tim Walz wanted done. And Keith, which I'm guessing is Keith Ellison, the Attorney General there of the state. Yeah, so he talks about how Tim wanted him to kill Amy Klobuchar and other people on his hit list. So, it's actually quite astounding to me how many people on the right buy this verbatim. They believe this verbatim. And I'll explain why I don't necessarily believe this to be a genuine sentiment by Vance Boelter. Of course, if it is a genuine sentiment, he's just a nut, which he is either way. But, you know, rereading Vance Boelter's manifesto, and honestly, I have a hard time taking it seriously. I mean, if he actually believed what he was writing, that would make him nuts. But maybe that's what he wanted people to believe, rather than that he was a Republican who was hunting down Democrats. Either way, he's a nut. But I'm just wondering to what extent his personal politics played a role. So yes, Republicans, understandably, very upset with the assassination of Charlie Kirk. Rest in peace. Democrats respond in many cases by saying, what about this? What about that? That's just how politics play out. What about this? What about that? Never-ending series of whataboutisms on both sides. Republicans, they say, hey, this is not the example you're looking for. Some Republicans even claim to this day that Vance Boelter was a Democrat, namely because he was appointed or reappointed to a board by Tim Walz at some point, and he was supposedly Tim Walz's buddy, to the point where we're supposed to believe that he was going on a killing spree on behalf of his buddy, Tim Walz. But I'm going to share some of my findings with you. I'm digging into Vance Boelter due to all the whataboutisms by Democrats after the assassination of Charlie Kirk, but also because of the desperate attempts by Republicans to paint even Boelter as a Democrat. Responses to some talking points below, and I've been in a thread responding to different people about this, disagreeing back and forth. So I said in response to someone who was touting the typical talking points of the right about this, listen, I can't stand Timmy the man-toddler, but let's be factual. Him being more progressive than ever and despising Republicans doesn't erase the realities of government. So as you can see in the screenshot below, you're wrong on point one. Point one by the person I'm responding to was that Tim Walz, because he hates Republicans so much, would never have anyone on any board for any reason whatsoever who was the least bit Republican. But, unfortunately for the person I was responding to, yes, Tim Walz has appointed Republicans to positions during his tenure as Minnesota governor, 2019 through the present. Minnesota law requires the governor to make hundreds of bipartisan appointments annually to over 200 unpaid advisory boards and commissions covering topics like workforce development, which is what Vance Boelter was on, tourism, and public health. These roles are technical and citizen-driven, with the governor's involvement often ceremonial rather than personal vetting. So maybe they weren't buddies after all. Key examples, and there are some Republicans who are mentioned here as current members even of the governor's workforce development board. So The person who I was responding to did not hit me back after this. I don't blame him, because he said, no way Tim Walz would have a Republican on his board. And then lo and behold, there are currently Republicans on that very board. Come on, people, do better. There's broader context here, and mentions of different boards, so on and so forth. But you get the point, you get the picture. Proof positive, Tim Walz has in fact had a variety of Republicans on various boards in his state. I'm not so sure he would want to pay them, but some of these positions are unpaid positions, as we just read. But yes, I continued here with a quote. Although Hortman was the only Democrat, that's Melissa Hortman, who voted with Republicans to pass a budget bill that will remove adult immigrants in the U.S. illegally from the state's Minnesota Care Health Program, Hoffman voted against the bill that would end such coverage. So, people say, like this person I was responding to, the two people he killed had just voted with Republicans on something. So therefore, he was a Democrat who was mad at them and wanted them dead. That's the argument. The problem is, although Melissa Hortman did in fact vote with Republicans on this particular bill, you can't say the same thing about John Hoffman. So that's actually a lie, or at least it's inaccurate. John Hoffman was the state senator who was nearly murdered by Vance Boelter as well. So I say, thus you're only half right on point 2. And I could have started by actually reading the points up here, but this person had said, the two he went after had just voted against the Democrat Party. Days later, he strikes. Yeah. That's not entirely right. That's why I said you're only half right on that point. If you actually believe that drivel in his letter about Tim Walz being behind it, you'd definitely believe him when he showed up at your door in a mask pretending to be a cop in order to murder you. Which is what he did. By the way, as I've been pointing out to other people with arguments the depth of a mud puddle, the letter is literally written from the perspective of someone who believed that he was about to be either caught or killed, which he says in the letter. Maybe because of the foiling of his plans. And seeing as how he was going on a spree to kill the evil out of Democrats, it's possible that he didn't want the story to end up being about how evil a Republican was, as in him, once he knew he wasn't going to get away with it. I'm just saying, everything he did in that short time was meant to manipulate people. So it's beyond amusing if you specifically take that letter seriously. I mean, it could have even been a last-ditch effort to shift blame to the evil Democrat governor. Try again. Scrolling further on down. The notion that because Vance Boelter was once reappointed to a community-oriented workforce development board, he must therefore be buddies with Tim Walz, or at least definitely a Democrat, is just simple-minded, to say the least. So I shared another post of mine from a thread of arguments on this topic. So here, the guy I was responding to had said, the idea you think Tampon Tim is appointing a MAGA Republican to anything is entertaining. To which I responded, so you believe that there's no way a Democrat would even indirectly allow a Republican to remain on a board of random community members, but you also believe that a Democrat would put together a hit list of 45 Democrats and then some and start executing them. That's beyond entertaining. Boelter's term on the board expired more than 2 years before the murders. That's more than enough time to become radicalized. Look no further than Tyler Robinson, who literally grew up in a Republican family and recently went off the deep end, left of center, clearly. Tyler Robinson, the assassin, and the death of Charlie Kirk. But I'm not even asserting rapid radicalization here in the case of Vance Boelter. There's literally old footage of Boelter overseas preaching about how abortion is evil. But wait, you think Tampon Tim would want that belief on his board? By the way, he literally had Planned Parenthood members on his hit list. So things are starting to add up, right? Look, he was likely a right-leaner who largely kept his politics to himself, as some of his associates have actually attested to. Didn't talk about it publicly. In the public workspace. Then he, at some point, reached a point of radicalism beyond repair or simply lost his mind and took it out on the party whose personal politics he opposed. And it's not hard to get a quote on that from, once again, his associates. On December 9 of 2019, Waltz reappointed Boelter to serve on the group as a business member. The board, which has about 60 members, 41 of whom are appointed by the governor, which means not all of them are even directly appointed by him or reappointed by him, analyzes and recommends to the governor and state legislature workforce policies related to things such as talent development or addressing barriers to employment to help Minnesota maintain a globally competitive labor force, its website says. The board includes members from the public sector, the private sector, organized labor, and community-based organizations, the website said. This is a part of an article I read. Boelter's most recent term on the board expired January 2 of 2023. Hoffman, who underwent surgery for his injuries, served on the board with Boelter, the New York Times reported. So Hoffman, one of the individuals, one of the Democrats whom Boelter attempted to execute, literally served on the board with Boelter. Doesn't that make them buddies? So in Tim Walz's case, Boelter was doing the executing on behalf of Waltz. But in Hoffman's case, Boelter was literally attempting to execute Hoffman. There's just no consistent narrative coming from the right on this at all. And I think that's because they don't really know the details about this. I didn't really know some of the details until I started digging, but that's what you got to do. And no, the Hortmans, not exactly the public figures that Charlie Kirk was. This wasn't national news to that extent. Slightly different situation. The murders were not in broad daylight. And also, there was no large-scale celebration coming from the right after this happened. There may have been a few inappropriate statements made here and there, but there was no general celebration on the right about this. To the contrary, it seems like Republicans believe that, or at least many Republicans want to believe that Boelter was actually a Democrat or something like that. But it just does not make sense, as I'm sharing with you now. All right, so here's Red Steez, Stephen Miller, the other one, making a lazy argument in response to another lazy argument, and it's amusing to me how people who question motive until it fits their narrative can so quickly buy that Tim Waltz was the motive, in this case, just because a manipulative murderer said so. So yes, here you see Stephen Miller had reposted someone else. That someone else had said, what about Melissa Hortman? They murdered her. Okay, the word they there is a bit partisan sounding. But yes, before that, Stephen Miller had said, at least no one is harming them being the progressives. This guy, Noah Smith, responded, what about Melissa Hortman? They murdered her. And then, like I said, Stephen Miller responded to that by reposting that, saying, Melissa Hortman was murdered by a former Tim Walz appointee, a selective detail, who in his manifesto, which wasn't really a manifesto, said he killed her because the country needed Tim Walz to be in the United States Senate. A selectively believed detail right there, if I ever heard one. And every time we refute this, people like you have nothing to say about it. You refuted it? How? By reading one note written by the man who is going to people's doors in a mask posing as a cop in order to murder them by fooling them first. Then, once he believed he was about to be caught, he wrote a note, which he obviously knew was going to be found, and claimed that it was all because of Tim Walz. How gullible must we be on the right? Oh, come on. You're shaming Republicans with how easily you're buying all this. He continues, you are literally making the laziest argument possible for the fact that Charlie Kirk was killed for his actual speech. Okay, Charlie Kirk should not have been killed. That's first and foremost. That was horrendous. But it was politically driven murder. And it appears, if you don't simply rely on one note written by the murderer himself, it appears that Vance Boelter's murders were also politically motivated to a certain extent. To a certain extent. The same extent we're judging Tyler Robinson on. What else do we have here? Worth noting that the image of Vance Boelter's supposed manifesto didn't show a manifesto, but rather a hastily written post-attack note, seemingly to throw off the authorities about what his true motive was in light of him realizing he would be caught. So the man has up to as many as 70 people on his hit list. Gets a couple of kills in, and a couple of unsuccessful kill attempts in. His plans go awry. He realizes they are hot on his trail. He's going to be caught or killed. He writes a note which was not a part of his initial writings. So he plotted this. He planned this ahead of time. It's all right there. But then after he realizes he's about to be caught or killed, he writes an additional note, and that's the only one that people like Stephen Miller care about. So I was reposting myself here. I had said, it seems to me that he indeed wrote that manifesto after those initial shootings, seeing as how he mentions the details of the shootings in the manifesto, which isn't exactly a manifesto if you ask me. Just more mind games from the man whose murdering wasn't going according to plan. Also, he did send messages to his family after the attacks, mostly to the effect of realizing he was about to be caught and being sorry that he had involved them. So I was responding to someone who was asking about reported messages to his family and also about the timing of that so-called manifesto. Yeah, well, he lists the timings, the exact timings of his killings in that so-called manifesto. So it was clearly after his initial attacks. But yes, those who honestly believe that Vance Boelter was going on a killing spree on behalf of his buddy Tim Walz must have a hard time reckoning with reports that Walz himself was among those Boelter intended to kill, along with 45 Democrats and additional public figures. I believe that Democrats totaled out to more than that because I believe that they were all Democrats. It's just that some were like in government and some were not necessarily. Some were members of Planned Parenthood, things of that nature. Ilhan Omar. So some people are saying, some people on the right are saying, he went after the most moderate. He went after the most moderate Democrat. If he really wanted to weed out leftism, he would have started with Ilhan Omar. It's like, well, she was on his hit list. Do you not believe that list? You just believe the manifesto with Tim Walz referenced as the motive? You don't believe the other list, which, has not only Ilhan Omar on it and Amy Klobuchar on it, but Tim Walz himself owned it. So, goodness. They were buddies, but also he was going to kill his buddy. Again, no coherent line of logic on the right in regards to this story. We got to get this right. Come on. I'm not even arguing that this is exactly the prototypical version of right-wing violence in America, or like that this guy was a fan of Charlie Kirk or something like that. I kind of doubt that that's the case. This is an older man. This man was going overseas and preaching his own message. Well, in his mind, the message in the Bible, but it's clear that he didn't exactly live in a Christ-like way. But yes, I have a screenshot here. Vance Luther Boelter, the 57-year-old that authorities have identified as the suspected gunman, wanted for allegedly shooting and killing a state representative and shooting and wounding a state senator in a targeted act of violence, allegedly had dozens of Minnesota Democrats on a target list. Those on the list included Governor Tim Walz, U.S. Representative Ilhan Omar, U.S. Senator Tina Smith, and State Attorney General Keith Ellison, according to law enforcement sources familiar with the matter. So, he in his totally not manifesto listed Tim Walz and Keith Ellison as his motivation, but also he had them both on his hit list. He's playing mind games. Police said the list, which was retrieved from the suspect's vehicle, also named Hortman and Hoffman. Both victims are Democrats, and Hortman was formerly the Speaker of the Minnesota House of Representatives. It's also possible that he's totally nuts, but I'll remind you that he was messaging his family members with apologetic thoughts, at least apologetic for involving them. He had his head on his shoulders to a certain extent, though here in this photo it looks like he has someone else's head on his shoulders because he was being manipulative. He was fooling people. He was dressed as a cop. He had lights on his vehicle, impersonating an officer, skin-tight face mask on, and he knocked, and they answered. Yeah, more photos of him. This is at the time they were searching for him. What else do we have here? Semantically speaking, it might be fair to say that Vance Boelter's motive was unclear. But the same could still be said of Tyler Robinson and the assassination of Charlie Kirk. So my point is simply that if we're going to connect obvious dots in one case, we should be willing to connect the obvious dots in the other case as well. So this is a screenshot from a CNN article. At the bottom here, I highlighted, a longtime friend, David Carlson, told CNN on Saturday that Boelter was a conservative who was strongly against abortion. He said so himself in his sermons, which you can find online. Strongly against abortion access, but never mentioned particular anger with the lawmakers who were shot. I imagine he was somewhat close to the vest on much of his politics, at least in public. Except when he went to the Congo and thought he could make a difference. But don't believe the longtime friend. Believe the murderer himself in his one note, not the other notes. Totally ignore those. Just the one note, which you call a manifesto. Despite the voluminous writings discovered in Boelter's home and car, no clear manifesto has been uncovered, according to Thompson, the acting U.S. attorney. No manifesto is mentioned in the affidavit. In his writings, he had many, many notebooks full of plans, lists of names, surveillance efforts that he took to surveil and locate the home, addresses, and family members' relationships with these elected officials, he said. But I have not seen anything involving some sort of political screed or manifesto that would clearly identify what motivated him, he went on. obviously his primary motive was to go out and murder people. They were all elected officials. They were all Democrats. Beyond that, I think it's just way too speculative for anyone that's reviewed these materials to say what was motivating him in terms of ideology or specific issues. But if you put two and two together, listen, I'm a Republican. But to me, this guy seems like a Republican who believed that Democrats were evil. That only makes sense. And if you're making that same sort of argument, drawing that same sort of conclusion in the opposite direction when it comes to Tyler Robinson's assassination of Charlie Kirk, I don't know why you would have an issue with me on this. We've got to put two and two together. We've got to connect the dots. No, I'm not saying the murders are exactly the same in nature. I'm saying that although the case may not prove there's a trend of right-wing violence across the country, it certainly isn't an anecdote which Republicans should keep dismissing every time the Democrats mention it. It's disturbing stuff, and it was clearly politically driven, even if incited only by the maniac in the mask. Screenshot from PBS here with a reference to PolitiFact as well. Fact-checking unsubstantiated claims linking Governor Walz to Minnesota lawmakers' shootings. Hours after the shooting of the two Minnesota lawmakers and their spouses, prominent conservative influencers spun unsubstantiated theories that the suspect was a left-wing extremist who targeted the Democratic-aligned leaders for voting against party lines, and did so with the blessing of the state's top Democrat, Governor Tim Walz. Authorities said a man posing as an officer shot State Senator John Hoffman and his wife, Yvette, in their home early June 14, and then shot and killed State Representative Melissa Hortman and former Democratic Speaker. Well, she was the former Democratic Speaker, and her husband Mark in their home a few miles away. And I could go into that a little further. I could pull up the article, read the entire thing, but I've already gone on for so long. I'm going to have to edit this a bit. I've gotten tongue-tied a few times. I don't like that. I also don't like PBS. I don't like PolitiFact either. But facts are facts, and there's no denying that the right spread a lot of conspiracy theories about the Hortman murders, etc. And still are. I mean, Republicans are still spreading conspiracy theories about this because they can't put two and two together, I guess. They can't connect the dots, I guess. I'm not saying Democrats didn't also twist certain elements of the story, but let's just be real here. The jumping to conclusions is out of control across the board, and getting it right in regards to Charlie Kirk's assassination doesn't automatically mean we conservatives always get it right. I'm humble enough to admit that. To add to the thoughts above, the posts below by Senator Mike Lee in the wake of the Boelter attempted murders, because there were many more which he was either attempting or going to attempt. These posts by Mike Lee, Senator Mike Lee, were not appropriate, to say the least. So as you can see here, he posted on the left, "Nightmare on Wall Street." And on the right, "This is what happens when Marxists don't get their way." The implication obviously being that Marxists were responsible for this. Of course, he was merely projecting. He was merely assuming. But yes, he was blindly drawing inferences before the blood had even dried. I believe he later deleted the posts, but now that he was so much more sympathetic in response to Charlie Kirk's murder, I've seen some people bringing this up as an example of inconsistency, and yes, this sort of thing is a bad look for Republicans. In other words, do better. Here's an article about Vance Boelter's various business ventures and ministry in the Congo. It's not hard to find clips of him preaching over there with the assistance of a translator. Yeah, there's a lot to this article. I don't know that I want to dig too deep into this. Oh no. My free access has timed out, essentially. I don't know that I can actually read this article anymore. I had it pulled up earlier. had access to it. No longer. That's what happens on some of these pay-for-play platforms, publishers. But yeah, basically it talked about different business ventures he was involved in, financial elements of that, also his ministry overseas in the Congo and such, though he had a history in various countries, as he mentioned in that note of his. One more article I read while putting this thread together, the main thing notable about it is what you see on the screen right now. Different websites he had used to research the locations, not just identifications, but locations of those he was putting onto his hit list. But Minnesota lawmaker shootings, who was on Vance Boelter's hit list? No need to break that down any further. I just got tired of being met with moronic arguments like these and thought I'd put a thread together about Vance Boelter. So yeah, I was in a back and forth with someone who said, it makes no sense to disguise your motive when doing a politically motivated killing. Then when I responded with, but going on a Democrat killing spree on behalf of Tim Walz makes sense. I'm just trying to make reasonable observations here. And I pinned another post of mine, but that person responded to me, why are you trying to make sense of an inherently senseless man? So I pointed out that this person was saying, it makes no sense to disguise your motive when doing a politically motivated killing. And then saying, why are you trying to make sense of an inherently senseless man? Okay, you're just deflecting. So you yourself say something that's intended to make sense of it. And then when I disagree, you ask me why I'm trying to make sense of something that's so senseless. You can't win with some people. You just can't. So I asked, what narrative would you like for me to simply repeat ad nauseum, since you're apparently just going to deflect from any alternative thoughts? Have not yet heard a response on that. And lastly, here's the DOJ Vance Boelter indictment statement, just to complete this thread for now. I already have it pulled up over here. Vance Boelter indicted for the murders of Melissa and Mark Hortman, the shootings of John and Yvette. I'm bad when it comes to pronouncing that particular name. I never did figure that one out. You can see it there highlighted. Hoffman. And the attempted shooting of Hope Hoffman. And this is just in regards to the federal charges, obviously. But this was published on July 15, a few months ago. Vance Boelter, 57, has been indicted on 6 federal charges in connection with the stalking and murders of Minnesota House of Representatives Speaker Emerita Melissa Hortman and her husband, Mark Hortman, the stalking and shooting of Minnesota State Senator John Hoffman and his wife, Yvette Hoffman, and the attempted shooting of their daughter, Hope Hoffman, announced acting U.S. Attorney Joseph H. Thompson. Vance Boelter planned and carried out a night of terror that shook Minnesota to its core, said acting U.S. Attorney Joseph H. Thompson. He carried out targeted political assassinations, the likes of which have never been seen in Minnesota. We grieve with the Hortman family and continue to pray for the recovery of the Hoffmans. Today, a grand jury indicted Boelter with the most serious of federal charges for these heinous political assassinations. Let me be clear, Boelter will see justice. According to court documents, after extensive research and planning, Boelter embarked on a murderous rampage targeting Minnesota's elected officials and their families. On June 14, 2025, the defendant disguised himself as a member of law enforcement and traveled to the homes of Democratic elected officials with the intent to intimidate and murder. Early that morning, the defendant traveled to the Hoffmans' home in Champlin, Minnesota. By posing as a police officer, Boelter compelled the Hoffmans to answer the door. He then repeatedly shot Senator Hoffman and Yvette Hoffman, and he attempted to shoot their daughter, Hope Hoffman. Boelter then traveled to the homes of 2 other Minnesota elected officials, only to find that no one at those locations was home. He next drove to the home of Speaker Emerita and Representative Melissa Hortman. There, Boelter repeatedly shot and killed Representative Hortman and her husband, Mark. Following a 2-day manhunt, during which he wrote that note, law enforcement arrested the defendant near his family residence in Green Isle, Minnesota. The defendant is charged with numerous counts, including the stalking and murders of Melissa and Mark Hortman, the stalking and shooting of John and Yvette Hoffman, and the attempted shooting of Hope Hoffman. The defendant faces charges which include maximum penalties of up to life in prison or death. There's a lot more information. I think we've covered the basics. He wasn't going to stop there, but his plans fell apart. And I believe he did have a brief interaction with some other cops, but because he was posing as a cop, he passed the sniff test, or so they thought, though they were suspicious. But because of things not going exactly the way he thought, and because of various suspicions of others, he was ultimately caught. And the man with the plan, who had a mask on his face and a gun in his hand, he later wrote that note, which now Republicans, despite not wanting to believe so many other narratives out there, are willing to believe every word of this. And you can pause and try to read it off the screen if you want. It's hard for me to even read it because I can barely even read my own writing as is. But it's just crazy to me that people, and this is coming from Dana Fauci here at the top. That's the name of the account I follow. I'm a fan to a certain degree. But this murdering maniac, manipulative murdering maniac, says, Tim Walz wanted me to kill Amy Klobuchar. And Republicans are just like, "Ooh, we totally believe this. Case closed. You have been disputed. You have been debunked." Like, no. And if it was the other way around, if this had been an actual Democrat with a long laundry list length hit list of Republicans on it whom he intended to kill, and then was about to get caught and wrote a note like this, it would definitely not be believed. Not a word of it would be believed by Dana Fauci. Just throwing that out there. Because I follow all these people, and I know how one-dimensional and inconsistent they can be. I can be sometimes too. But I think the fact that I've covered this, I've done my due diligence, even beyond what I already knew about it. And because of what I already knew about it, I hadn't even been running my mouth about it. Like, when Democrats were looking for whataboutisms, which has been happening, and they referenced this, I haven't just slapped it down. Like, that guy was totally buddies with Tim Walz. That has not been my response at all. In fact, it has bothered me quite a bit when I've seen that response. It's like the Pelosi's or not, when Paul Pelosi was attacked by a nutcase who was looking to attack Nancy Pelosi, who just so happened to be gone at that time. There were a lot of theories out there, and I get it was a mysterious case, a lot of weird stuff about it, but people on the right ate that up, and they spun the narrative. There was this idea that it was just two men in their underwear having a good old time at night. But that was all speculative, and it turns out, as I figured it would, that this guy was indeed a nut who was there doing damage. And I did like an hour show at that time. It was probably on my previous channel, where it has since been deleted, that show that is. And I played all the video footage, and I called it exactly like it was. And I was not one of those Republicans who found themselves in a bit of hot water, or at least getting called inconsistent, or getting called hypocrites because I was making jokes about a hammer to the head. Like Paul Pelosi getting hammered his history with alcohol. The hammer to the head obviously led to jokes there. I was not making those jokes. So I've washed my hands of the weirdness. I am free to speak my mind without being labeled inconsistent on this sort of thing. Or at least I'm doing my best here. But let me know what you think down in the comments below. I'd be happy to hear from you, even if you disagree with me. Gotta go. Thanks for watching. Thanks for listening. Keep in touch. Keep in tune. New content is coming soon. Peace.